welcome to Ars Libri, an everyman's journey through Western literature, where we explore the literary arts book by book, reading, retelling, and reclaiming our rich heritage. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry is a Pulitzer Prize-winning Western novel chronicling the adventures of a cattle drive from Texas to Montana in the late 1870s. Augustus McCrae and Woodrow are retired Texas Rangers. They run the Hat Creek Cattle Company in the small town of Lonesome Dove in Texas, just a mile north of the Rio Grande River. They are bored with their quiet life, and their friend and former ranger, Jake Spoon, convinces Captain Call to lead a cattle drive to Montana, where they aim to establish a ranch in the fertile, unclaimed territory. They assemble a diverse crew, steal cattle and horses from Mexico, and set out on a grueling journey north. Along the way, they face dangerous weather, hostile natives, outlaws, and their own personal conflicts. The drive tests their endurance, reveals their strengths and flaws, and leads to profound losses. The novel concludes with the survivors confronting the consequences of their ambitions and the fading of the Old West. Augustus Gus McCrae is a main character. He is a charismatic, talkative, and philosophical ex-Texas Ranger. He loves adventure, whiskey, and women. He is the heart of the group and often clashes with Woodrow Call's stoicism. Woodrow Call is a duty-bound ex-Texas Ranger, the second main character of the book. He's the group's leader. He is obsessed with discipline and the mission, and he struggles with personal connections, especially regarding his unacknowledged relationship to Newt. Newt Dobbs is a young, inexperienced orphan taken in by the Hat Creek outfit. He is a sensitive, eager young man trying to prove himself, and he faces the harsh realities of the trail and wrestles with his unknown parentage. Jake Spoon is a charming but reckless ex-ranger. He joins the drive briefly. His poor choices, including falling in with murderers, lead to his downfall. Joshua Dietz is a skilled, loyal black scout and tracker for the Hat Creek outfit. He is a quiet and dependable man. He's respected by all, but faces dangers on the frontier. P.I. Parker is a simple, loyal member of the Hat Creek crew and former ranger himself. He's dependable but lacks ambition. He often follows Gus and Call's lead without question. Lorena Wood is a young prostitute in the town of Lonesome Dove, seeking a better life. She joins the drive hoping for freedom, but faces exploitation and danger. Dish Boguet is a skilled cowboy with a crush on Lorena. He is honest and hardworking. Dish represents the younger generation of cowhands, but struggles with unrequited feelings. There are many more characters in this tale, including Clara Allen, Julie Johnson, Elmira Johnson, and Blue Duck, each with their own rich narratives and character development. All America lies at the end of the wilderness road, and our past is not a dead past, but still lives in us. Our forefathers had civilization inside themselves, the wild outside. We live in the civilization they created. But within us, the wilderness still lingers. What they dreamed, we live. And what they lived, we dream. T.K. Whipple, Study Out the Land. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a book called Lonesome Dove by a man named Larry McMurtry, or Larry McMurtry. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but maybe my guest can help me. I have a guest on this time. His name is Davis C. Moore. He's a friend of mine. He is a landman in Texas, outside or near Lubbock. He works for the Vandelay Land Work LLC, and his job description here is extensive. Title research, abstracting, run sheets, ownership reports. I can't even pronounce some of this stuff, to be honest with you. Due diligence, curative, easement, acquisitions, landowner relations, independent petroleum landman. Davis, thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks, Thomas. It's always good to visit with you. You're a good old boy, and this is a fantastic book. And I'm always happy to bend somebody's ear about Lonesome Dove, so it's a pleasure.
That's great. That's great. I have to admit, the first time, Davis, that I met you, you told me you were a landman, and I had no idea what you were talking about. I just went with it. I was like,
yeah, well,
that's great. Man, that sounds awesome.
It's always interesting telling people what I do, depending on where they're from. You know, I'm born and raised in Midland, Texas, which is, as far as I'm concerned, it's the oil and gas mecca of the world. I think Tulsa and Houston can go kick rocks. But, growing up in Midland, I mean, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a landman. But when I run into people who are not as familiar with oil and gas, they seize me as somewhat exotic. So it's always interesting discussing that.
Well, great, man. I was reading this book. I've read it once before. I was reading it again for this show. And one of the main characters in Lonesome Dove is a man named Augustus McCrae. This man is loud. He's opinionated. He's quick-tongued and quick-witted. He's a jolly fellow. He's a cowboy. He lives in Texas. And I was thinking, Davis, that's you.
Well, I mean,
you're Gus McCrae, man.
Lest my hubris show, I won't say whether or not I agree or disagree, but I will say that's maybe one of the finest compliments someone has ever given me. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. Gus is a great character. His character develops through the story, and you really see that he is a strong man. He's kind of philosophical, and sometimes he plays the foil for the other main characters. There's several main characters, but another one is Captain Call. But anyway, we'll get into that. Let's go ahead and get into the book. Why do you think this book is important? Why is it important to you? Why should it be read by others? You said you've read it many times, and you've watched the movie several times. Why is that? Why do you feel drawn to this book?
Well, I think it probably has to begin with, I'll start with how I began to be enamored with it. And then, a good book is kind of like a really good friend. As you spend more time with it, you kind of peel back layers and you find more and more things to appreciate. It probably began with just growing up in West Texas. In West Texas, it was all, cowboys and guns and cattle and things of that nature. And in Central and West Texas, once we finally whipped the Comanches and we could actually get some work done out here, it was the cattle business that really had solidified, the economic aspect of West Texas prior to the oil and gas industry. And there were a lot of cattlemen, ranchers who had made their money in cattle and then eventually got into the oil and gas business. In fact, there are many ranches who their cow operation today is really sustained by the oil and gas business. And so there's a chronological connection there. But McMurtry, if you know the story of Mr. Goodnight and Mr. Loving and the J.A. Ranch and things of this nature, there are little themes and snippets and quotes, even an epitaph on a man's tombstone that is taken from that story, and McMurtry places it in Lonesome Dove. So there's these great real life stories even influence the book. There's of course it's great writing, it's humorous. There's a great depth to these characters. Even McMurtry, I think he writes women well, and I think for a writer, I'm no writer. I'm a dummy from West Texas, but I can imagine how difficult that would be. So I might be somewhat rambling, but go ahead.
when you say West Texas, is that something different from East Texas? For those outside of Texas, is there a difference in culture, and what is the difference here?
Well, there are some differences in culture. So the most stark difference would definitely be geography. So
sure.
Midland, where I'm from, gets an average of 11 to 13 inches of rain a year, which is just wildly different from what you would experience in Tyler, Longview, something like that. And then, when you have culture and history, the longer span of history you've got, you have the longer amount of time for that culture to settle. Okay, so Texas obviously, prior to the war between the states, seceded and went with the good guys, but that was mainly East Texas because that's where everyone lived. It wasn't until after the war between the states, in about the say mid 1870s, roughly 150 years ago, it wasn't until then that primarily the Comanches, but also the Kiowa, probably to a lesser extent, this took place a little earlier, the Apaches, it took that long to whip them and move them out so that Anglo settlers could further move west. But who settled West Texas? Well, it was largely people from American Appalachia, Southerners. It was a lot of Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, Alabama, Georgia.
Wasn't it Gus in the story was from Tennessee?
Yes, Gus is from Tennessee, and Woodrow Call is from Scotland. I don't recall if the book gets into where Call grew up, but that's correct.
Yeah, I think it said that Call was brought over as a baby, but I don't know where he grew up in the States.
Well, the line that Gus uses was, "You were still dragging on the tit when they brought you over from Scotland," as I recall.
That's right. Yeah. Your memory's good.
I've read it a few times.
I just read it. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that, so this book is centered in Texas in the 1870s, I'm guessing, maybe the 1880s. It's just after the Civil War, a few decades after the Rangers were driving out all of these savage elements. And I could see why people from Texas would want to read this book. I think it's important for everybody to read this book also because it is the American frontier as we know it in our minds. Now, in the frontier in the 1600s was further east. The frontier in the 1700s, Kentucky. But the frontier in the 1800s, in fact, the last time there was an American frontier in our minds, it was this area. This area, when you think of cowboys and Indians, all of the movies, all of the stories that we read about, maybe in, let's say, Louis L'Amour or something, it's in this area. And so the history of the wild parts and wild times, the uncivilized areas of America are really born in this area. And so I could see why it's an important book. And it is well written, as you said. The characters are rich and deep. You get really into their minds, and then they develop over the course of the long story that's presented before us by Larry McMurtry. What are some themes or some scenes that interest you in this first portion of the book where they're still in Texas? What's something important here that we should focus on or learn from or read about when we read the book?
Well, I think maybe one of the first things would be the friendship between Gus and Woodrow. Because early on, it seems like they just kind of bicker with one another. You know, if you've never seen, your first time, say, reading the book, you've never seen the movie, it seems like these two are maybe sort of antagonistic to one another. But as the book unfolds, it's obvious, they are as best friends as friends could be. And, as guys, we experience that. I think some of my best friends, and if someone was to, walk onto the back porch and I'm sitting there with my buddies, what do we do? Well, sure, sometimes we edify one another. We talk about serious matters, but most of the time we're ruthlessly insulting one another. And that's how guys get along. If someone's hanging around me and I'm not giving them the business in pretty short order, that's probably a signal I'm not a big fan of theirs. But I think the friendship that is portrayed in this book between Gus and Call it's beautiful. I think it's one of the main draws of the book. It presents us something to aspire to, but at the same time, it's familiar enough where we can kind of see our friendship in their friendship. As you think of whoever your best buddies are, you see elements in that interplay between Gus and Woodrow.
And that friendship had been formed decades ago when they were rangers in Texas.
Precisely. Yeah, through work and hardship and Indian fighting and, figuring out what to do with girls and all that entails.
Now they had started raising cattle and raising horses or selling horses and pigs and all kinds of things. But
now they don't rent pigs, as you'll recall.
They don't rent pigs. That's right.
They don't rent pigs.
They put that on the sign of their outfit, the Hat Creek Cattle Company. But you're right. I do like this part about the book. It gives it an air of authenticity right away when you read the book. You do feel like you are back in the time of these men because of the way that they talk. They insult each other. They rib each other really hard. And yet, then they sit down to eat breakfast together as though nothing had happened. Today, we have a discourse among men that has become very effete and polite, almost like a courtesan sort of way of talking, where we have to be kind and courteous and never speak harshly to one another. But the Bible says iron sharpens iron. That's not a pleasant process when men rub on each other real hard like that, but we do sharpen each other and we improve each other. We push each other on to excel beyond what we would normally do just by ourselves, I suppose. So you have these scenes where men speak rather brusquely to each other and roughly, and then they go on to accomplish some task together. Their feelings aren't hurt, in other words. It's a harsh environment, it's a harsh frontier, but they're hard men, and they're able to dish it out and take it. These guys develop in their relationship as they go on to push north. Eventually, they start off in Texas, and they actually have no horses at all. They only have a few. And then there's a man that comes asking to buy some. He wants 40. And then they say, yeah, we'll get 100 for you tomorrow. And the guy's like, well, 100? Where are you going to get them from? And they said, don't worry about it. We'll just get them. And then they're right down there on the Rio Grande River. And they just cross it in the night and go and raid a bunch of horses, and I think some cattle too, from the Mexicans down there, and bring them back up north and sell half of them to this guy and then take the rest and begin a cattle drive north.
Yeah, a couple things about that. So this in the movie or miniseries, whatever, generally speaking, I think the movie is one of the better book to movie adaptations out there. It's generally pretty faithful. I think the only one that's probably more faithful off the top of my head would be Cormac McCarthy's No Country for Old Men, which was later adapted into a movie, and I think 2011 by the Coen brothers. But in the movie, I think one of the primary failings of the movie is that the character Will Barger is not included. And Will Barger is great. He's he's a rancher like these guys. He's a Yankee, but him and Gus become pretty fast friends. They're both loud. They both talk nonstop. Yeah. They both have a good sense of humor. And as the book unfolds, it's really a joy whenever Will Barger pops back up. Just reading his discussions with Gus it provides a lot of comedy to the book. And then the second thing I wanted to mention to what you said, and this is addressed specifically or rather explicitly in the book and the movie. These guys, Gus and Woodrow and their merry band, are they're decorated Texas Rangers who saw some of the fiercest Indian fighting in the mid 19th century Western frontier, and then they're crossing international boundaries to rustle horses and cattle from other bandits themselves, and it's ironic, it's comedic, but these raids also do provide a good setting, where Woodrow and Call or rather Woodrow and Gus are bickering, and Gus and Jake are bickering. It's a really great scene.
Yeah, it's interesting because Woodrow, or Captain Call, as he's named in the book, there is a younger man named Newt, and Newt doesn't know who his father is, and Call...
Well, it's Mr. Dobbs, of course. Newt Dobbs.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Newt Dobbs. Yeah, Mr. Dobbs, right. Well, Call takes Newt on this raid. He's a young man, untested, and as they're down there, Newt starts thinking, how is this legitimate? Because horse thieves in the United States, that's a capital offense. You'll be hanged for stealing horses, but if we cross a river and go into Mexico, it's okay. But then he reasons, well, Captain Call said we ought to do this, and therefore it must be okay because it's Captain Call. And everybody looked up to Captain Call as this leader, the unflagging, always right leader. Except obviously Gus didn't see him that way. He saw them as equals. But they're down there and they're raiding horses. Another funny thing that happens in this scene is as they get the horses and they're running them back up north, they encounter another herd of horses running south. And this herd of horses, they're being run south by some vaqueros, some Mexicans who had gone to the United States to steal horses. And so the Mexicans coming back from the United States with horses run into the Americans coming up from Mexico who are stealing horses, and they all just run together, and then Call, and I think whoever else is with them, absorbed the other herd and turned them all north, and the vaqueros ran off because the vaqueros thought nobody would try to raid this many horses unless it was the U.S. Army. And so they thought this is the U.S. Army's down here. Oh gosh, we got to get out of here now. And they took off, and they didn't know that it was only 3 guys who had just happened upon 100 horses or something in a valley and took them all.
It's a great scene. It speaks a lot to the it gives me kind of Eight Together Strong vibes. Just the confidence of Jake and Gus and Captain Call as they're doing this. I mean, if you were to ask me, hey, let's cross an international boundary and steal horses, that's somewhat of a daunting task. And these guys do it as a matter of course, and it shows that whatever they're doing, they really are professionals, but they have a good time while they're doing it. I wanted to bring up something about Newt. You reminded me. So in the book was one of the things I really like about how McMurtry weaves the story together. It's not merely narrative, this happened and then this happened and this happened. They might be, say, crossing the river, and then McMurtry writes of everything that's going on in Newt Dobbs' head, and that kind of inner monologue with Newt, that may take up the next 3 or 4 pages, and then they jump back into the scene and what's actually happening real time. And he does this with most major characters. He does it with Gus and Call and Clara and Deep and P.I. and Dish and Jake, and it provides so much. It provides color into what these characters are thinking. He goes into a lot of the backstory and the history of these characters, and sometimes it's not merely providing the backstory. McMurtry's telling you this character, while they're doing this activity, is thinking about this thing that took place to them sometimes decades prior, which is kind of how we are. We might be driving down the road, and I might be thinking of a conversation I had 15 years ago. And McMurtry really brings his characters to life. It gives them so much depth.
Yeah, it's natural, too. You don't feel like when you're getting the backstory of, let's say, Lorena, the town prostitute in Lonesome Dove, the main opening scene, you don't feel like when he tells her backstory that you're missing out on the main action of the story and you're just reading through it to get back to the story. No, you feel like this is just going through her mind in the main course of the events of her day as she's moseying about the Dry Bean Saloon. And then it bumps right back into the story, and you feel like it's a very natural transition. He's a really great storyteller.
Yeah, he really is good. And kind of, because sometimes, let's take Gus, for example. Gus may not be speaking in that scene, but McMurtry is telling you what's going through Gus's head. But a lot of times it does not sometimes you can tell the narrator, so to speak, is telling the story. And sometimes Gus is telling the story in his head. And McMurtry sort of weaves in and out of these. It's just great. it's one of the things that makes it a marvelous book.
Yeah, yeah. So after they get the cattle and the horses, there's a man named Jake who actually showed up before this. And Jake Spoon is an old ranger buddy of theirs from long ago, and he's been traveling everywhere. He shows back up, meets Gus and Call, and he brings an idea with him about going up to Montana, where there's grass everywhere, and there's nobody yet who has claimed land there. So there's an interesting dynamic that goes on in this story of the civilizational settlement of these areas, and yet still the savage, untamed nature of some of these places as well. So Jake is saying, let's go up, or you ought to go up to Montana, and nobody has yet claimed any land, and if you go there first, you'll be amazingly wealthy if you can establish the first cattle ranch there and claim land. And this idea gets into Captain Call's head, Woodrow, and they begin to get ready for this move. There's another character, I mentioned Lorena. She meets Jake, and he convinces her to go to San Francisco or San Diego or someplace. And so she ends up joining this band as well, of leaving Lonesome Dove. So the whole main scene of the story starts there, and then they begin to go on this long cattle drive north.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention about how these characters deal with ideas or an industrious notion or convictions or things like that. You know, as you see as the book unfolds, Jake is he's kind of a tragic character regardless of whatever happens to him. Jake is a guy who, how I would describe him, he has all of the worst qualities of Gus and none of Gus's good qualities. And I don't think he really has anything in common with Call whatsoever. But Jake will have these ideas, these notions, without any awareness of how this might affect other people.
Right.
Jake probably is. He's one of the most selfish characters maybe ever, written on paper. Gus is a guy kind of like Dietz. He is really content and cheerful in all weathers. And Call probably loves work more than anything else. And that's probably a cover for some of his other failings. But he is a hardworking guy. But this idea gets in Call's head, and Call just latches onto it with a vice. He says, I'm going to take a herd north. And it's not because he wants to be rich, as Gus said, and I think rightly so. Gus says of Captain Call, you dislike money even more than you dislike fun, if that's possible. And it's really true. Yeah. Call doesn't like fun, he doesn't like money, but he does like to work. And he sees this, Jake doesn't present a challenge in Jake's point of view. Jake presents an opportunity, but Call loves a challenge. And that is what drives the whole
no one's done this before
narrative of the book. Precisely.
Yeah Jake, you're right, he is selfish. One of the tragic things about Jake is that you're right, he doesn't think ahead. And when he comes to town, Gus and Call both suspect something's up, because he rides to town on a horse that looks really ragged, and Jake's character is one who loves fine things, fine clothing, fine haircuts, fine table manners, all kinds of things. He likes to present himself prettily. His pistol has a pearl handle. They keep talking about that, how it's all nice and pretty. But he rides to town on a horse that's ragged, and they're like, what's going on here, Jake? And he tells them that he shot a man in Arkansas and killed him by accident, but he's running from the law up there, and now he's here. And as I mentioned already, he meets the town prostitute. Her name is Lorena. And Lorena has been abused in her life already. She's extraordinarily beautiful. And she has dreams of going to San Francisco or someplace. And Jake kind of talks her up about it. So he talks Call up about going to Montana. And then he talks up Lorena going into getting her to California. And so she thinks, I'm going to stop being a prostitute and I'm going to be Jake's sweetheart and he's going to take care of me. But then it quickly comes out that Jake has no intention and really no capability of taking care of her. But she joins the band going north thinking at least this will get me out of town and keep me with Jake, and hopefully we'll eventually get to San Francisco. And Call is thinking, I'm going to go on this adventure. I'm going to do something that's never been done before, go all the way up to Montana. But it's an arduous journey that you have to essentially ride a horse or walk from Texas to Montana through territory that is unknown, it's unpaved, there are no street signs and roads, there's no Starbucks or Walmarts along the way, there's no signs, and there's a bunch of Indians out there. Some of them are really, really bad dudes who the Rangers still weren't able to defeat. And the Army hasn't come out there and submitted all the Indians yet. So they're going to have a long, hard, arduous journey. And a lot of these guys, too, haven't made such cattle runs before. There's only a few of them that are actually good hands with cattle, like I think Dish Bogart. He was a cattleman, whereas most of the rest weren't. They could ride a horse and move cattle around, but being able to traverse long distances with cattle is not something that they're used to. So this is an incredibly long journey. It's an adventure, essentially. And that's the majority of the book, is them moving north and experiencing river crossings, bad weather, getting a new cook. I think just the cook who ends up going with them is an amazing character in himself.
Oh, Bolivar, Ball is hilarious. But before we get into that, you reminded me of something. So Lori is taken with Jake, and Jake is taken with Lori, but both for wildly different reasons, and they each have different intentions. I'm going to try to communicate this in a way without giving too much away. So Gus sees himself as sort of a prophet, or at least he likes the notion. And, the book kind of describes as Gus fancying himself a prophet. Even early on in the book, as Gus is preparing his sourdough biscuits in the Dutch oven, and as the sun comes up, and Gus makes it a point to watch sunrise every morning because he enjoys it, because it's pretty. Yeah. He's sitting there, he's reading the Bible. And the book references that he's reading the prophets, and then later specifies that he's reading Amos. Yeah. So Gus fancies himself a prophet. The author or the narrator sort of describes him as a prophet. As you'll see as the book, I'm talking to the people who hopefully are going to read this book, whether you've read it before or not. Gus says a lot of things in this book, and most of the time sometimes he's giving a warning to somebody. Most of the time he's giving them the business. He's ribbing them a little bit. But Gus says a lot of things in this book that come true later. And I don't know that, I don't think McMurtry is any sort of biblical scholar. His son, James McMurtry, though he makes great music, he's a hicklib, he's a goober. But I think McMurtry really does set Gus up as sort of this unassuming prophet, which is what Amos is. Amos was sort of kind of a country boy. I don't know what else you describe him, but he has these scathing critiques for those whom he delivers these prophecies to. And I don't think Gus is necessarily, scathing anybody. He certainly doesn't have, perhaps a high view of what the Bible says about sexuality. But Gus really does sort of fill this prophet role. But I wanted to get into that, at least to tease it to people who are going to read the book. Yeah. Yeah. Gus, when he talks a lot, and he talks loudly. And sometimes it gets a bit too much. He's always giving these long-winded responses to things that just seem unnecessary sometimes. I'm not faulting the writer. This is on purpose. This is Gus's character. But as Gus talks and talks and talks, you do get the feeling that Gus is almost like the narrator of the book. Because it's sort of like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. Gandalf will say things, and you can understand this is the author giving you direction into where this is going. But he's doing it through a character rather than just through a objective narrator voice. So Gus, when he's talking, you need to pay attention, because Gus is telling you where things are going. When Call wants to go north and Gus starts saying, you don't know what you're going to be doing up there. You don't, this and this is going to happen. You're going to run into this. And sure enough, a lot of that stuff does happen. Yeah, Gus is sort of part prophet, part color commentator of the whole story.
That's good.
Just think of whatever he says about Call or Dietz or Lori or Clara, whether it's foretelling or not. Gus is pretty much a truth teller. I'd have to go back and pick through it, but I don't think there's hardly anything that Gus says that is just flat out not true.
Yeah, he is telling the truth, even if it's raw and harsh. Everything he says, nobody can really disagree. In fact, almost all of the characters in the book, they just give up arguing with him. They're like, I just don't argue with Gus because he's right and he'll out-argue you anyway. So,
and most of it's really funny. I mean, he's a very humorous prophet. I'll say that.
Well, so let's get on to the journey part. What are some important scenes and things that happen, events, character development that happens on their journey?
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an idea or two. I'm going to try to do this without giving too much away. But there is the issue with the water moccasins in the Nueces River. That's probably the first truly shocking event that happens in the book. There's dust storms. There's when the lightning hits the cattle. I think Newt loses his horse, once or twice during the book. And then there's the entrance of Blue Duck. But we can cover as much of that as you want. It's a long book, too, so...
Yeah, it's a long book. So just for the listener, in order for us to really discuss the book well, we're going to have to discuss some important turning points, some spoilers. So just know that we're going to be talking about some things that if you want to have all of it saved for your reading, then maybe skip some things we'll tell you, like with the snakes and with Blue Duck and the capture of a certain character. So those things are important. I will say this, though. A lot of what happens, a lot of what David's just described, it's shocking when you read it. This book, there's that frontier rawness to it. There's a realism, a grittiness to it. So if you're of a soft stomach, so to speak, you might want to watch the movie or listen to us discuss first rather than just jump right into the book. It's pretty raw. So for instance, the scene with the snakes, we're going to get into it. Basically, when they went and raided those cattle and horses in Mexico, they found 2 Irishmen out there who had left Ireland for the United States, but they overshot
Alan and Sean O'Brien.
Yeah, and they overshot America, or the United States, and went to Veracruz or someplace, and they just found them out there, and they took them up, brought them back to the United States, and they come along, and these guys have their own backstory, their own character arcs, but there's an incident where they're crossing a river, and one of them hits a bed of snakes, and everybody's there, the whole herd and all the cattlemen or whoever else is crossing the river, and suddenly this one man screams out, and it's this blood-curdling scream. And Newt especially, I think it gives this from the perspective of Newt, because he's a young man. He looks back and sees this, and he sees one of the Irishmen covered in snakes. And they are just biting and eating him up.
They're water moccasins, and I believe this takes place, right after a big storm, if I remember correctly, and they send Dietz up to scout. Dietz is the scout of the book. He's the best scout in the world, and he finds a good place to cross, and they later, they're trying to make sense out of this tragedy. They think the storm is what stirred up these water moccasins, and Dietz, and it wasn't Dietz's fault, of course not. It was a freak accident, whatever you want to call it. But Dietz is really racked with guilt that this is where he picked across the Nueces River, and those water moccasins who were stirred up, and it's like a clump of water moccasins. It's a horrifying thing. I've shot a lot of rattlesnakes in my day, but generally speaking, rattlebugs will kind of leave you be. Water moccasins that come after you.
They'll come after you. That's right.
Oh, they're horrifying. I'm scared to death of water. It's water moccasins and redheaded women. I'm scared to death of them. I don't want no part of them.
They'll come after you, huh?
I'm telling you. That's why my fiance is a brunette. Yes.
There you go. All right. Yeah, so this guy crosses over, and again, it's from the perspective of Newt that you get some of this, of a young man. Newt is a very innocent character, at least throughout most of the book. He becomes a man, he grows up, he becomes hardened over time, but he's a dutiful young man. He's obedient to call. He finds his identity. He doesn't know who his father is and who he really is. But he's a good young man, and he sees this happen, and he sees this happen to the Irishman. And if I recall correctly, the Irishman wasn't too much older than him, so he's thinking, "Man, this is horrific." As he's watching this man breathe his last, and the venom is coursing through him, and this man's dying, and nobody can do anything about it, and then he just perishes right then and there. It's a tragic scene, and the tragedy. Anytime something tragic happens, somebody loses a toe or gets hurt in a certain way, and different types of tragedies. One man who worked the dry bean, he had a hole in his stomach, and he just had a hole in his stomach because he was shot. Like, that's just how things are back then. And it's tragedy. Today we get sick or something, we go to the hospital and get it fixed up real quick. We don't experience tragedy like they did back then, where you live with it and you move on as a matter of course, because that's how life is. And it's just the rawness of that scene and the shock of it really hits you hard.
Yeah, and tragedy is a huge theme of the book, and they talk about how different characters will deal with tragedy. Even Gus himself. Gus is a twice widower by the time the book Lonesome Dove begins. The tragedy has, tragedy touches everybody. We're people in a fallen world. We deal with the effects of sin. And everyone in this book is no stranger to it, and they all have a different background, a different history, and they deal with tragedy different. Gus, though he is, he's carefree and he's a jokester and he jibber jabbers all the time, but he's also a hardened ranger who's an excellent pistol shot, as we see later in the book. He has confronted horrendous tragedy. That's one thing that adds a little color to the book. As they encounter other tragedies, the characters will remember of someone who had met with a similar fate in the past. And a lot of times for Paul and Gus, they recall a ranger that they had known in the past who had met with a similar fate or an absurd fate or a really painful fate.
You mentioned Dietz earlier being a good scout. This is something that we haven't mentioned, but I really appreciate in the book how these men have abilities which they have honed, which they naturally have, but they've trained themselves to be able to survive and thrive and overcome all of the obstacles of living on the frontier. So Dietz can judge distances like nobody else. He can judge them at night, he can judge them in a storm, and this sort of thing is extremely important when you're trying to avoid people, when you're trying to get somewhere at a certain time. He can tell you how far things are from here. It's about 5 miles away from where we are right now, northeast. And there's a river right up there too. We're gonna have to cross it over here. He just knows these things. I've always been surprised. For instance, my dad loves to fish. We're in Louisiana, growing up in Louisiana, there's a bunch of waterways and bayous. And my dad can navigate all of those bayous and waterways without a map. And we're talking thousands of little waterways, and it's like roads with no landmarks. Everything looks the same, and there's no signs. He just knows where he's at. I remember going alligator hunting when I was a teenager with a friend of mine, and we would go at night. I'm probably admitting to something illegal here. I was just in the boat.
I'm sure you're well past the statute of limitations.
Yeah, okay. We would go hunting, and he would drive through the bayou. It's pitch black. There are logs, there are stumps in the water, there are invisible things, there are trees. You can't see anything. The stars are your only light. And we don't use a spotlight because we would signal to anyone around where we are. So he would drive through the bayou without,
like the game warden.
Looking. Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, people who can do things like that, they can spot all of the signs of deer in the woods. They're just really good at that. Other people have no idea what they're looking for or what they're looking at. And when it comes to living like that, it's not just, oh, cool, you can go fishing or hunting. But when you're living, when your survival depends upon your ability to hear sounds from a mile away, or to pick up a scent or a trail. Even Dietz, that's another thing. He could smell things. He could smell danger, the book says. And how could he do it? He didn't explain. He could just smell it. He said, just like a fox can smell danger, he can just smell that something's not right. And it was a sense he had, and it worked. And I don't think it's too fanciful. I think there are men like that, because I know some who do that today. It's just fascinating to me that these men, through their sheer will, their abilities, their senses, their know-how, their practicality, they're not the most learned men. Most of these guys can't read. Gus didn't know Latin, even though he wrote a Latin phrase on the sign of the Hat Creek Cattle Company. But these men are smart in another way.
Yeah, each of these characters has their own set of competencies, just as well as they have their own failures. As I think of all these characters setting off on the cattle drive under the employ of Gus and Woodrow, it reminds me of kind of the Fellowship of the Ring. They're all characters with different and characters in every sense of the word, with their own backgrounds, and they all kind of have their own skill, which makes them an asset. Ideally, I don't know that Jake Spoon really has any assets or competencies that go beyond the card table. But yeah, it's just one more thing that helps you really get to know these characters and appreciate them in their own way. And yeah.
Going back to Jake Spoon here. So as they go north, all kinds of things happen. One thing is that Jake Spoon breaks off and goes off with some other guys. Can you explain that story a little bit?
Well, yeah. So this is a little further ahead in the book. If I remember correctly, it's either in Dallas or Fort Worth, but Jake breaks off from the drive. He needs to go back to his old ways, and he falls in with a group of rough characters, and Jake needs to find a way to safely get through basically Indian territory. They go through Oklahoma and up into Kansas, and Jake, as I mentioned earlier, Jake is one of the most selfish characters ever put to paper. And Jake latches on to this rough crowd, the Suggs brothers, and Frog, Mr. Frog, the Suggs brothers and Mr. Frog. And Jake's one only thought is, well, I can use these guys to get through the territory with my scalp intact. He gives no thought to, could these guys be leading me down a bad path? Are these the sort of characters I want to even be seen with, riding through the territory with? That doesn't even crosses Jake's mind. And so it really is amazing that Jake is even, in his character history. It's shocking that Jake has even lived long enough to make it into this book.
Right.
Knowing how he makes decisions, the people he spends time around. Jake is constantly on the run from his own horrendous decision making. He is a fool in every sense of the word.
And the sad part too is that Newt looks up to him. I keep bringing up Newt. You get a lot of things from his perspective, and Newt looks up to Jake as this hero. That he's a younger man, although he was a ranger. He's younger than Gus and Call, and he makes these horrendous decisions. He leaves Lorena. He promised Lorena he'd take her to San Francisco, and she goes with him on the cattle drive, and he ends up abandoning her. She stays with the cattle drive, mostly under Gus's protection now, and he goes off with these bad men, and these men do all kinds of really wicked deeds. They're vile, evil men, lawbreakers and murderers and thieves, and eventually their lawlessness is found out by Gus and Call. And Gus and Call don't know that it's Jake. They just know that there's some men coming through where we're going, and these men have killed people. They've murdered. And they're stealing horses. And eventually they catch up with these guys, including Jake, and find out that their once good friend, their old former ranger buddy, and the man who actually started this cattle drive is basically a murderer and an outlaw now, or at least he fell in with murderers and outlaws. He's associated with them.
Right, without doing anything to stop it.
Without doing anything to stop him, right.
And he didn't even do the bare minimum of, just getting away from them and letting them go on. Right. It really was the bare minimum that he did. And it's worth pointing out how they find out Jake is with them. I don't think this is too much of a spoiler. That Jake and the Suggs brothers, their paths eventually cross. Their paths really do cross with Gus and Woodrow and Dietz. And Dietz is tracking these horses, and he sees that's Jake's track, which just sounds like, for people growing up in the 21st century, it's kind of an absurd, or if we don't spend a lot of time, hunting or in the woods or something, how can you tell someone by track? And, Jake knows, because Dietz knows, because Jake Spoon always rides a pacing horse, and he always sits the saddle in a very particular way. In fact, this was pointed out early on in the book when Dietz and Jake are riding up to the lot in Lonesome Dove at the Hat Creek Cattle Company. And you get the perspective of these characters as they realize this isn't just, a band of marauders we're about to have to go deal with. It's a band of marauders that includes our old buddy Jake, and they all grieve in their own way, but it's a really tragic aspect of the story.
It's very tragic. And you're right about Dietz. He's able to tell these things even when they raided those cows and horses in the beginning of the book in Mexico. He was able to tell that some people were singing. He found out that there were these white Irishmen before they even came anywhere near them. He knew. He heard it before anybody else heard it. He went and scouted and found it. And sure enough, he was right. And he was right again this time. Just from looking at the tracks that the horse left, he knew who was riding it. And the frontier justice, I won't complete the whole scene for the reader here, but there's a frontier justice that we don't have anymore. We rely upon the government now in every way to oversee the justice system, which may take months and years to enforce justice here, maybe never, but there's a frontier justice system that Call and Gus immediately, this is their ranger side that comes back out several times in the book, where when you meet them, they're older men at this point, still very capable though, but you don't see the ranger side of them. You see this side of these men who raise cattle and horses, and then they go on a cattle drive. But several times throughout the book, that ranger side comes back out, where they're men of law who are enforcing the law, and they're men of justice. They're also extremely good at killing and shooting and defending and so on and so forth, at fighting a war, whereas the other men aren't.
Yeah, Gus and Call are very much, when it comes to matters of justice, at least within the borders of the United States, their raids into Mexico notwithstanding, they are truly impartial in their judgment. Yeah. And they're competent. They're impartial in their judgments. They're competent to carry out the judgment, and they are willing. They are impartial, competent, and willing. And so, they did not set out on this drive to carry out justice. Call did it to have a challenge. Call did it to work. Gus did it probably to take care of his friend Call. And, I'm sure Gus appreciated the adventure as well. But when they were confronted with the task, the obligation to hand out justice, they did not shrink from the task. Gus didn't shrink. Paul didn't shrink. Dietz didn't shrink. And the unfortunate Newt is there, witnessed all this, but it sets an example for how Newt ought to live. Gus and Call are not the most perfect role models. Each of these guys has a lot of admirable qualities about them. But as far as carrying out this justice, while it's hard for Newt to go through something like that, they really were perfect role models in that instance.
Yeah, it gives you the perspective of Newt again in this scene. but I won't dwell on it any longer. It's a poignant scene, and it's a part where I think, again, Newt is being urgently pulled out of his innocence into adulthood and seeing the realities that confront you when you're living on the frontier like this. But we spoke of justice here and fighting. What about Blue Duck? You mentioned him. What's the story with Blue Duck in this?
Yeah,
tale?
so Blue Duck, Blue Duck is a wicked man. He's just as wicked as the Suggs brothers. I don't know who's worse. They're both pretty awful. Blue Duck was a half-breed Comanche, which is an odd statement to begin with. The Comanche were notoriously adulterous people, and they miscegenated like it was going out of style. Whenever the Comanches would raid somebody, they would bring other people into the band, depending on what their use was, and they would, mate and bear children with other Indian tribes, white captive women. So they say Blue Duck's a half breed. Well, all Comanches were mutts. Whatever. That's not the point. Gus and Call and Deeds and P and Jake Spoon, they all have history with Blue Duck. Blue Duck would raid the border country. He'd raid along the Canadian River. He would raid along the Red River. He was just a notorious Comanche marauder that they never quite caught up with. And, most of these other Comanches, most of them were whipped. Some assimilated as best they knew how to the white man culture. Like, Quanah Parker, who's really kind of a larger-than-life figure. Quanah, for all his failings, and he was Comanche war chief, and he was a murderer, and he did all the things that other Comanches did. Quanah knew when he was whipped. Blue Duck did not. Blue Duck never surrendered, and he would have a band of renegades. He had some Kiowas on the Llano Estacado, which is where I live, by the way. He had some Kiowas he ran around with. He had some renegades in Colorado he would link up with.
Yeah,
and
right.
Blue Duck lived his life as a murderer, a rapist, thief.
Yeah.
He's about as wicked a character as you can come across in this story.
Yeah, he shows up as these men are driving north, and they recognize that he's in the area. They learn he's in the area somehow. Then he shows up, and for some reason, I don't understand why, Gus and Lorena are bathing by some river, so they're off away from the camp, and Blue Duck comes by, and Gus doesn't do anything to him, but he doesn't do anything to Gus either. And they have some words, and then Blue Duck walks off. And then, after that, Blue Duck comes back and kidnaps Lorena, and then Gus has to go and see about it. I mean, can you explain some of that dynamic there? I don't know why that Gus didn't kill him when he had the chance.
Well, so Gus comments on this to one or two different characters, if not more. At one point, I think Gus tells this to Woodrow. I think Woodrow asked, why didn't you kill him? He said it would have been touch and go. It would have been 50-50 shot. Neither one of them had the drop on the other. They were both armed. Might as well have been point blank range. Yeah. I think Gus had intended to catch up with him later. I mean, Gus and Woodrow were very capable and experienced Indian fighters. And, one of the ways that you actually make it to retirement as an Indian fighter is knowing when not to fight or knowing when not to pursue. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it. Secondly, I think I think everyone was surprised when Blue Duck shows up, because when Gus makes it back to the herd and tells everyone Blue Duck's in the area, I mean, it's all hands on deck. Guys are scrambling and loading guns and checking guns, and Calls handing out orders. They recognize how much of a vicious threat that Blue Duck poses. Was it? I forgot what all you asked. Can I color anything else for you?
Yeah, that was it. Why he let him go? Because again, Gus was out there bathing or something, and Lorena was there. Again, Gus is older than Lorena. I'm guessing Gus is in his 50s or something, and Lorena is 24 or so. But he kind of takes her in as sort of a weird relationship. I'm not even going to try to describe it. But he and her are out there bathing, and then Blue Duck walks by them, and I'm sure Blue Duck saw them ahead of time, but he walks by and he doesn't do anything, and then Gus doesn't do anything, and Blue Duck walks off, and there's nothing. And then again, after that, maybe the next night or that night or something, I forget exactly how it happened, but he ended up abducting Lorena. And I won't describe everything that happens, but it's frontier tragedy, harshness. None of this is Disney. None of this is Hollywood. Okay, when you read this book, even the movie, even the way she reacts to all the bad things that happened to her in her past, it's not tinged with feminism at all. She handles it in a way that's unique. It shows just a hardness of the frontier and the way she handles her tragedies. But anyway, it's a tragedy what happens. It's horrific. But then Gus goes after her and goes and tries to rescue her, and that whole scene, that side quest story, even though it's not really a side quest, it's exciting, it's adventurous, it's horrific, it's scary, and it really shows Gus turning, like, the richness of the character, as you were saying earlier. He goes from being this really almost lazy, carefree. I mean, he doesn't even do anything at the Hat Creek Cattle Company. He does literally nothing. Even on the cattle drive,
yeah.
He does nothing. He's just there
in the evening. He does like to sit on the porch and pull a cork to feel a little misty inside. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and he just talks smack to everybody who asks him any question at all. And I mean, he does nothing. But then, when it comes time to fight, Gus is your man.
Yes, he's emphatically capable to carry out violence when necessary, but Gus is, he is kind of, sort of innocent as a dove to some extent. Not obviously not totally, but he is absolutely shrewd and vicious as a serpent when it's required of him. I mean, these two, Call and Gus, both are really hardened Indian fighters. I think some of these old Rangers were Jack Coffee Hayes or Rip Ford. I mean, these guys they're rough as a cob, but they weren't just rough, but they obviously were. They were very capable, very competent. And for anyone who made it to retirement as an Indian fighter, they're not the sort of man I would want to get crossways with. And to go back to Blue Duck for a second, he recognizes that. I mean, I think if Blue Duck thought he could get the drop on Gus, he wouldn't. They're in kind of this sort of Mexican standoff. And at the time where they meet in this book, they're both aged men. It's not like they're back in their 20s. Blue Duck rides down from the ridge, and about the, when you get old, you need some reading glasses. You can't see as well. I'm sure when they both realized who each other was, they probably treated that situation with, gravity. They're kind of trading verbal barbs back and forth. But neither one of them wanted to fight, or at least initiate the fight, because they weren't sure that they could win. So it is kind of a standoff situation they wind up in. But they both appreciated the abilities of the other as being a very violent yet capable opponent.
Yeah, Gus's hunt after that for Lorena is quite remarkable. His navigation skills, his night skills, his ability to creep and stalk and spy and listen, and then when the fight begins, it's like Tetris to the death or something. You've got this, or chess to the death, right? You've got these, it's this strategy of how to survive in a plain situation on the hills, in a river bank, behind trees, at night, in the day. And the way I'm not going to describe everything, but the way he uses his horse in this situation, all of it is just, and his marksmanship, it's just amazing. And it goes from, the book has times where it's real slow. Again, the beginning of the book, you feel like you are in Texas and there is nothing going on all day, every day.
Oh,
but in this instant,
you feel the heat of a South Texas evening. You know, I've been in those situations. You're just begging the sun to go down. You're begging clouds to form. You're just so hot. You're just miserable. And you know, we can critique Gus's laziness, but I can kind of understand. You know, he wants nothing more to do than to sleep late and drink bourbon in the afternoon just to kind of get some relief. So the way that McMurtry writes weather, environments, seasons, it's really, really good. You can feel yourself in that story if you've ever been in a similar situation. McMurtry's great at it.
Another scene that interests me, if you have any, please offer them, but one that interests me is when they find, is it Clara at her Nebraska home?
Yes, so outside of Ogallala.
Yeah, they make it up to Nebraska, and Clara is an old flame of Gus's, but it didn't work out. She ended up marrying another guy. And what's interesting to me is they meet, first of all, their reunion is just touching and heartwarming, and it just shows the life that Gus could have had. And this is the important theme to me. Gus chose this hard life of rangering, of being a cattleman, raising horses, living singly down in Texas. And here is this beautiful woman. She's now older, and she has a husband who is ill, and he's laying ill, probably dying on his bed, and I think she has children. And she has a nice house and estate. She raises horses, or her husband does or did. And they have horses, and they sell them to the U.S. Army. It's good business, and it's like a little oasis of paradise that Gus could have had if he would have made a decision long ago. Of course, it was her decision. She didn't want to marry him, probably, though, because he was wild, and she knew he wasn't going to settle down.
Their decision-making is both at fault or at play here. Yes, Gus was wild. Claire didn't want to put up with it, but, you know, Gus tried to have her, and she wouldn't have him. So there's this, it would have never worked out, you know. Yeah. It's that kind of deal.
Yeah. I think every man, at least maybe not every man, I know in my mind, these sorts of thoughts went through my head when I was a young man, because being free and unfettered and being able to travel and have fun and live an adventurous life and spend all your time and money on hunting and fishing and biking and cars and adventure, living outdoors. All you have is a couch and a beanbag and some mayonnaise in the fridge, and you have a truck and you sleep in the bed when you go camping, and it's just so much fun as you're a young man. But then you see another man who's got a family and kids and a nice warm home on Thanksgiving with his family, and you don't have that. And what sort of lifestyle do you want to live? Do you want to be on the frontier, putting down evil, conquering the savage, making the world safe for the civilized man to come along and plant a homestead? Or do you want to be the homesteader guy who stays in one place all the time, doesn't have adventures, but he does have a loving family? And so these two, it just clashes in that moment. And I think almost all cowboy and Indian era books and movies portray this. There's the wild, uncivilized man who he fights evil. He fights off the bad guys. He defeats the wild animals and the Indians. But he's not safe, and he's not stable, and he doesn't have a family. And he hardens himself to the love of a woman, and he doesn't have children, and he doesn't have manners, perhaps. I mean, he's just a hard man. And then you have the other man who's a banker or a lawyer or a doctor or a dentist or the judge, the homesteader. You've got these two different men, and which one do you choose to be? Which one is the right one to be? I know in Christianity we talk a lot about getting married and having babies and buying a house and homeschooling and stuff like that, and you're told to be the one. But is there room for the other? You know. Anyway, is there a time for the other? I mean, what would life be like today if we didn't have those rangers out there putting down the savages who were basically slaughtering and killing people wantonly? Where would we be today if we didn't have the crusaders who fought off the Muslims, right? If it were just a bunch of farmers who stayed home all the time, which one should you be? And he shows up to Clara's house and he sees what his life could have been like. And she even begs him, begs Call, you ought to let your boy Newt, or she doesn't call him your boy, just you ought to let Newt stay here with me because he's going to run into the same life that you're living right now. He's going to end up like you. But he could stay here and have love and have a family and have a life that's stable, safe, and responsible, all these sorts of things. It doesn't feel Longhouse at all in the book. It's not what I mean. Anyway, that's a poignant scene and a contrast to the rough life that they've been living, and then they just show up on this kind of the shores of this safe haven island for a time in the middle of all that. Yeah,
there's so much to say. One thing I'm reminded of is Ecclesiastes 3, is where the Solomon tells there's a time for everything, a time to kill, a time to heal, etc., etc. And Call and Gus, they set about their lives, and Gus tried to settle down to an extent. I mean, he married 2 women and they both died on him. So I think Gus kind of gave it an honest try. Call's interaction with women is there's so much to say. Read the book. But Paul very greatly struggles on how to interact with women, how to deal with them. This sort of conversation that that we're all having, on New Christian Right Twitter or something. Go pursue a woman, be confident, settle down, do all this stuff. Paul is so far removed from that. It would take a lot of, discipleship, I guess you could say, to get him to kind of be in that discussion. And then there's the matter of Clara. Clara has Gus's wit, but it's a much sharper tongue. Clara basically needs an attitude adjustment. She is pissed off at most everybody, but there is a certain measure of sweetness to her, domesticity to an extent. But she's really picking up the slack for her husband, Bob Allen, who he's not a horse trainer. He's sort of a horse. He owns horses, but he's not competent in them at all, which kind of leads to his downfall. You can read the book. But yeah, it's interesting trying to consider what we want as men, these discussions that we have in 2025, and considering how these guys in the mid to late 19th century would be a part of that. It's a different deal. But one thing I want to mention is, generally speaking, we understand it is the ideal for men to be competent in a trade and to court a wife and win her affections and have a bazillion kids. Most guys should be doing that. If you're listening to this podcast and you're a dude, that's probably what you should be doing. But at the same time, we need to recognize that there's a time for men to be not wild in a sense, I guess kind of wild, but being able to competently deal with evil and threats. Yeah. And I think all men should aspire to some sort of competence. Well, there's another character that we haven't even dealt with at all yet. That's all the Arkansas people. So July Johnson, who's the sheriff who's pursuing Jake Spoon. Yeah. Poor old July. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Peach, the bully, who said, "July, you don't have the sense that God gave a goose." And she was accurate. July wanted that quiet, settled life. Well, July's got problems. One, he picked the wrong woman to try to do that with. And then when he has to go recover her because she skips town, he does not have the competence to deal with that. in a successful fashion. In fact, it's a big theme in one of the scenes of the book where July later runs into Gus. Gus is trying to take care of these Kiowas. He runs into these Arkansas pilgrims, if you will. And Gus is very much competent to deal with this evil, and July is not. And so you've got the desires of what we want out of life. You've got to consider the kind of station we're in, what sort of life can we pursue, and then when you're met with adversity, when you're met with hardship, are you competent to deal with those struggles? And you see each character, you see their dreams, their desires, sometimes their suppressed desires, and then you see the competence that they have to achieve these goals, whether they voice them or not. And it's a constant thing that comes up over this as the story unfolds.
Yeah, poor July. He married Peach. What a name!
No. Peach is his sister-in-law. He marries Elmira.
Okay, that's right. Elmira. You're right. Right.
Yeah.
She ran off.
Elmira is also a bully. Elmira's worthless.
Yeah. What a character. And then Gus. You're right. He did try to get married twice.
Well, Gus was married twice, and he was widowed twice. It didn't
work out.
Widower,
because
whatever.
The women, right. Yeah, there's a need here to be one sort of man in some situations, kind of like the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. Yeah. He's a father, and he's got a home, and he's basically a father at home. He has children, his wife passed away, and he's trying to be a peaceful and quiet man, and then circumstances push him to go back to his warrior days. And the old savage nature that he had once exhibited with much prowess comes back. And I think that it's almost like a mythos in the American mind to have this savage nature that you put away while you try to be this gentleman, husband, father figure, this farmer, sort of mortgage-paying, blue-collar dad that can unleash violence at any moment. But I think in reality, what happens is that if you try to play the warrior, having a wife and children and a mortgage and a job at the local factory are a huge hindrance to that, because if people threaten your family, that's a vulnerability, right? And there have been many times in different parts of history where, like the Spartans or somebody, you have soldiers or conquistadors or somebody, and the requirement is you're not going to get married while you're doing this. You're not going to have children. You're not going to have these sorts of things to take your heart away or take your mind away from the battle. And then afterwards, you can go and have land and a family and things. This is what the Romans did. And they didn't outlaw families. They just said, you need to mostly wait for that, though, until you're 30. Then you can go. But my point is, there's this dynamic today. And I, for the right, I know a lot of people on the right don't listen to this podcast. This is more for like families and stuff. But today, there's a lot of battle language going on in politics. And what is the best position to put yourself in if you're going to fight? Is it to have a nice paying job at a factory with an HR department that can squash you at any moment for speaking your mind? Is it to have a big family? And I mean, those things are great. But if you're going to be a warrior, right? If you're going to be a frontiersman, if you're going to be a cowboy, what's the best position to be in? So here, this theme comes up. We don't have to dwell on it any longer. But it's fascinating to me because I know, for instance, I've been the young single man without any ties who is not fighting anything, but I'm just traveling and adventuring in life. But I remember looking on and seeing other people who had wives and children and households, warm households, look like a Thomas Kincaid painting almost from the outside, and you're like, I want that. Oh my gosh, that's what I need. That's what I need. I need to have that. And I think that's kind of how Gus feels. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit onto Gus, but it just seems like Clara's little safe haven And she even says it. She says, at least to Newt, like, stay here. And to Lorena, she wants Lorena to stay there and go no further. And she does. And her journeys are over at that point. She doesn't go to San Francisco or whatever. But the rest of the guys do continue on. And I think we can maybe talk about a few other themes if we have any, but we can let the readers finish the book and see what happens once they
I'll say
on.
One thing to tack on to what you mentioned.
Sure.
As we kind of consider who these characters are, what sort of life do they want to live? Are they able to achieve that? We really are in a different cultural moment. In this book, civilization is being built. The Americans are moving westward. Call is going to try to get a jump on it.
Yeah.
To have an adventure and to have some work to do, but he's going to make some money while he's doing it. Trying to get ahead of that. Understanding that civilization is coming and it's inevitable. Mm-hmm. Whereas in our moment, it seems like, we've got, whether it's barbarians at the gate or barbarians that are already in the gate, and some of these barbarians have been appointed to federal judgeships. Our civilization is being torn down.
Yeah.
And so we want to deal with the evil. We want to save our civilization, but not so that we can go be wild men and go on a cattle drive. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to plug the holes in the boat and get the water out. So we're in a very different moment, cultural and historical moment, than what these guys in the book are in. But obviously there's legion of lessons that can be gained from this work. And how do we consider what sort of life do we want to live? Do we have the competency to protect that life when it's confronted with adversity? Again, everybody read the book, but go ahead, Tom.
No, that's great. That's great. Read the book. We could talk more endlessly about it. I mean, there's so many scenes, so many little things that we passed up, like the shrewdness of the cook that ends up following them on their cattle drive, and how
Poe Campo is great, and he's got some fantastic lines. He's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, me too. And he's so resourceful. He's able to find food far out there and keep the men satisfied. He gives them treats. He can actually see when their spirits are low, and he's able to lift them with the food. I mean, it's like amazing the amount of thought that went into this book in every single way. How men ride horses, how they solve problems on the frontier. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that I don't know how Larry McMurtry knew all this. You know what I mean? Like, how did this come out of this man's mind? This is amazing.
So you reminded me of another, and if I've behaved myself, I get invited back again. We'll have to discuss some of Cormac McCarthy stuff. I am a massive Cormac McCarthy fan. I love his stuff, and I've read not all of it, but I'm trying to get to where I've read all of it. And the amount of knowledge and expertise that comes off the page as you're reading it, I want to go find, or someone's got to write some. I want some biography in Cormac McCarthy's. I want to figure out what in the world, what sort of life did this guy live where he was able to, you recognize this guy is an expert in a lot of stuff. And I see similar things, as you mentioned, with Larry McMurtry. Those sort of nuggets of like, how does he know this about this? It makes the book a joy to read, and you really become impressed with the author's prowess, not only as an author, obviously, but also his prowess in matters of, frontier history and horses and all sorts of stuff. Time fails us to mention all these things.
What's great about Larry McMurtry and Cormac McCarthy is that when you read this book, when you read their writing, you feel like I don't need to read a book of history about the West now because I've been there.
That's a great point. Yes, I agree.
It just feels like this captured it.
Yeah.
There's an authenticity there, even though I'm not an expert and I wasn't there and I don't live there even now. There's an air, a substantial authenticity here in the characters, in their speech, in their habits, in their actions, and all the little things, and the way he describes the weather, as you mentioned. how people handle tragedy. It's quite the tour de force. It's an epic in that sense. That's what an epic means.
Yeah.
It's like you were there. In this book, you were there.
Yeah, I think it truly is the epic of the American West. You know, what the Odyssey is to Greece and the Iliad, and then what the Aeneid is to Rome. I think Lonesome Dove is to the American West. And anyone who's ever, you know, been on a horse or listened to that goofy Toby Keith song or watched a John Wayne Western or has been to the Alamo or has been to Yellowstone National Park or whatever, if you're an American, you absolutely have to read Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. It's a required reading.
Yeah, when I read the book the first time, I remember thinking, I have to go to Montana. I just have to go now because they went. And I have to retrace the steps that these men walked, even though they're all just fictional characters.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, Davis, thanks for coming on. It's been a great discussion. Maybe we can do this again another time. I really appreciated you sharing your time and your thoughts with us on Larry McMurtry's book, Lonesome Dove.
Well, Thomas, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure to visit with you. I look forward to the next opportunity we get to hang out in person. This, like I said, it's probably my favorite novel. It's masterful. There's so much to glean from it. To figure out who we are as people, what kind of people do we want to be. I really have had a blast. And if anything, if this podcast encourages at least one other person to read the book, then I consider my time well spent, in addition to having a good time and enjoying to visit with you.
Well, thanks, man. I'll see you next time, I guess.
All right. See you, buddy.
Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this content, please consider supporting the show by subscribing at arslibri.substack.com. Your support enables me to produce this content. Subscribers also get bonus episodes, detailed book lists, and more.